Good evening. Welcome to Mental Health, Wellness, and Recovery. My name is Richard Weingarten. I'm going to be your host for this show. On tonight's show, I have the great pleasure of having Kathy Flaherty, an attorney who is Executive Director of the Connecticut Legal Rights, as my guest. The Connecticut Legal Rights Project is an advocacy agency that protects the rights of low-income people with mental health issues. Kathy is also a person in recovery from a psychiatric disability. She will tell her story of how she fought against the discrimination of the Bar Examining Committee when she went to become a member of the Connecticut Bar Association. This discrimination was based on her having had mental health issues when she was a student at the Harvard Law School. Her fight took nearly 2 years, but she finally won the approval of the committee and became a practicing attorney specializing in public sector law. Kathy is not alone in having to fight for her right to have a good job. Despite the American Disabilities Act of 1990, a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, and transportation, and public places that are open to the general public. The discrimination is still rampant in our society, and especially for people with psychiatric disabilities. The jobless rate among people with psychiatric disabilities in Connecticut is still very high. An estimated 80% of people with psychiatric disabilities in Connecticut are unemployed. This 80% figure has remained steady for many years. So it's a great honor to have Kathy with me tonight, and Kathy will begin by telling you and me a little about herself. Kathy?
Thanks so much for having me tonight, Richard. I appreciate it. My story begins the way most people's story does. I had what we'd probably call issues back when I was growing up, but I was a kid growing up in the 70s, and I do not think there was the awareness of children's mental health at the time. So I did well in school, but I struggled at home in my own head. College was fine, but I had problems with depression and anxiety my senior year of college. But that's really how I ended up going to law school. When one door closes, another door opens. And I went off to law school in the fall of 1990, which was just 3 months after the passage of the ADA. And didn't realize at the time that I was in the middle of my first manic episode. So I ended up hospitalized and treated against my will that first year, but was able to return to school the following year and graduate on time with my second first-year class.
Did you have any accommodations while you were in school?
I actually did. There were actually some restrictions put on my return to school, which I wouldn't call accommodations. They were things the school would not let me return to school unless I agreed to abide by. But there were times where, when I was particularly struggling, I spent a spring break in the hospital. Back in '94, if you were doing a medication change, you could do that in the hospital. People don't do that anymore. And I got some extra time for some assignments from some professors, and that helped.
Kathy, could you give us a little more background on you? What's your life like now?
What my life now, I have to say, is pretty awesome. I've been married for 18 years. My husband and I celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary in October. We don't have kids, but we own a house and we have a dog. I have a job. He's self-employed doing work he loves. I have a full-time job doing work I love, and I have a lot of support from family, from friends, and I run a lot. I run all over this state.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm part of a group called the Run 169 Town Society, and we literally run a race in every Connecticut town. So.
Could you say a little bit more about the Bar Examining Committee and how they tried to stop you from practicing law here, and what were their reasons and what were your reasons that finally allowed you to go ahead and practice law in Connecticut?
Sure. And I just want to start this story with a caveat that this is all stuff that happened in the late 1990s. I have been told that there are different things happening today and that the process has improved somewhat. But the problem that I had when I applied for the bar here in Connecticut is I was already admitted to practice law in 2 other states, New York and Massachusetts, and they asked questions on their examination, asking if you had any medical condition that, if untreated, could affect your ability to practice law. And I said yes. I disclosed I had bipolar disorder, disclosed I was hospitalized, and I got in, and there was no issue. So when I see Connecticut's questions, when I finally take the exam here, I have to say I literally threw the application across the room, because the questions that Connecticut asked took things to a whole other level. They actually asked if you had been treated for specific illnesses within the previous 5 years, if you had been hospitalized. If you were hospitalized, you had to sign a release for all your medical records. And anybody who's ever applied for the bar knows that they also ask a whole lot of other questions about your history of where you've lived for the last 10 years. Do you have a criminal record? Have you filed bankruptcy? So I was a little confused as to why they were even asking those questions to begin with.
Didn't they violate the ADA, though?
That was my position, and that was a position of other people. It turns out that the reason I had to answer those questions as they were at the time, if I wanted to have a chance of practicing law in this state, was that those questions were the result of a previous lawsuit. There was a time where the Connecticut bar asked if you had ever received treatment for anything ever, mental health-wise. They were sued. They restricted it on a time basis, for some bizarre reason on a diagnosis basis, and then went forward from there. So I answered the questions, I took the exam, I passed the exam, and got a letter that I wasn't being recommended for admission and had to go to a meeting with this local committee.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, that was pretty much my reaction when I got the letter. So I go to the meeting. My uncle had been practicing law for decades in Connecticut. He said, I know the people on this committee, you should be fine. Needless to say, that meeting didn't go well, and I recommend anybody doing advocacy in Connecticut not go in with the attitude I went in with, because when they ask you, why are you here today, and you say, because you people feel the need to talk to me about my mental health condition, needless to say, it went downhill.
Yeah.
But the reasons they gave for being particularly interested in the answers to those questions were not reasons that I thought were legitimate, but you asked what they were. I was told that the practice of law is very stressful. I might not be able to deal with the stress, and that I would hurt clients. And little baffled by that, because I had never ever threatened to physically hurt anybody but myself, but it was just an automatic assumption. Oh, you have a mental health diagnosis, therefore you're potentially a danger to clients, and we have to protect the public from you.
That's pure stigma, isn't it? It's a stigma that people with mental illness are violent or dangerous or incompetent, It sounds like they had very little contact with real people that had mental illness before you.
It certainly seemed that way, based on some of the questions I was asked during the course of multiple hearings over the 1.5 years it took me to get admitted. I was actually asked if I took mood-altering drugs, to which my answer was, to the extent I'm diagnosed with the mood disorder and the medication controls that disorder, I guess one could say they alter my mood. And it was fascinating to me that, people who actually were parents of high school classmates, people I knew, people who were professionals, who were educated, had such disturbing views about people like me. Literally the day I got sworn into the bar, the judge in his chambers said that he was really glad they had this conditional admission process, because I used to not let people like me into the bar.
Oh my God.
To which I said, thank you, Your Honor.
Now, you said that you had some conditions posed on your passing, that you had to report to them every 6 months or for 5 years or something?
For 9 years, I believe, the total was by the time it got done. I had to write a letter every 6 months that I was compliant with my treatment, and my doctor had to submit a letter every 6 months. And if the letter from the doctor was not there between the 1st and 5th of January and June, I would be getting a call on the 6th saying, where's the letter? And I would say, I will get you it. I talked to my doctor about this at my last appointment, but I'm sure my doctor has lots of other things to do other
Has
than
the
get
situation
this letter to
changed
you.
at all in recent years?
It has changed in 2 respects. One, the bar examining committee has changed the questions. They, at some point, I think it was 2010, which is 20 years after the ADA passed, they changed the rules of professional conduct to say the questions would be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it took them 20 years to acknowledge that the ADA was a factor in these questions, and they said the process would comply, and they're not meant to be overly intrusive. They have narrowed the scope of the questions somewhat, and I have been told that they have changed some of the process. From the people I've heard who've been subjected to it, it doesn't sound a whole lot different to me. And the only other difference that I'm aware of is that they've put a outside time limit, a maximum on how long a condition can apply. When I was admitted, basically the conditions stayed in until a court removed them.
In other words, there was no idea about recovery, no acceptance of the fact that people get better and they know how to manage their illness and they know how to take care of themselves so they can work at a professional job like that. I mean, it seems to me that these people are totally uninformed as to who has mental health conditions today and what their reality is like, what their potential is like.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And I think the other part was they never ask any of those questions about any physical illness. I made the point I could get hit by a bus tomorrow and my clients are in just as bad shape, if not worse, depending on the extent of my injuries, as anything else. Or I could have a heart attack. Or I could be diabetic and go in, you know, everything that could play out. And they do nothing about that. But for whatever reason, although there have been a lot of people, and it hasn't been just me, there's been a whole community of people that has really fought to get these questions changed, there's still an element of, there's no better way to refer to it other than an old guard that just believes that these questions are appropriate, the inquiries will be asked, this is Connecticut, this is the way we do things here, and it's just really frustrating, especially from a profession where there really is a move to talk about diversity and inclusion. When we have questions that single out a certain part of our potential lawyers.
It sounds like this whole process of defending your rights and trying to get instated in the law and to practice in the state has taken a long time, but it's also given you a kind of a fighting stance to help your clients at CLRP, the Connecticut Legal Rights Project, because these are people, low-income people, that are having experienced discrimination and some kind of prejudice about their mental condition, right?
Absolutely, and if anybody, I have to actually thank the Bar Examining Committee for having put me through that, because it really gave me a motivation for my entire career. You know, I was able to intern at Connecticut Legal Rights Project when I was in law school, so to be able to come back and lead the organization, you know, 22 odd years later, is phenomenal. I mean, this is a dream job for somebody like me who lives with a mental health condition, has recovered from a mental health condition, to do things to fight for the rights of other people like me. I can't ask for anything more than that.
Can you share with us maybe a story or two of one of your cases?
Yeah, especially because you're talking about employment. There's a lot of different things we do, and I can go back and tell you in a little more detail all the different kinds of things that CLRP does. But here's a great example of somebody who has recovered, is getting a job, goes for an interview, has a job coach there. They don't say who the job coach is when they're doing the interview. Person gets offered a job. Then the job coach calls the employer and says, you qualify for a tax break because you've hired somebody with a disability. To which the employer says, what do you mean? What's the disability? You didn't tell us that. You should have told us that. We're rescinding the job offer. At that point, the person didn't want to work there anymore, understandably, but that was a discrimination case that we filed on behalf of that person.
Has it been decided yet?
Oh yeah, that person won what they were looking for.
I see. Did they go for the job, or they didn't go for that job?
I think the tough thing is that particular individual decided to go for damages rather than the job, because that's a tough thing. I mean, think about it. Whenever you're fighting any kind of discrimination, whether it's housing, whether it's employment, once you know that that's how people really think about you, do you really want to be there? No.
Probably not.
And you know, we have the right to be in those places, to be in those spaces, to be included, and people really need to start realizing that we frankly are here anyway. I have always shared my story. I know you have always shared your story, but I am sure you know as many people as I do, where if they were to reveal the truth of their experience, they would face some of the same discrimination that you face, that I've faced.
Oh, definitely.
And that's why, even though I think the only way things will ever change is when more of us do share our stories, I totally respect the decisions of people who choose not to, because there are different things going on in everybody's life.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's one of the reasons for this program, is so that stories can be known out there in the public, and people can start to see that people with mental illness are competent, are professional, are well-mannered, have motivation. I mean, these are things we have, but yet they're not appreciated by the public who doesn't know us yet,
Right. And I think especially when the face of mental illness that the media puts on it, the scary, the violent, all the other stuff, I can understand the perspective of people who feel like, oh my gosh, those people are so scary. I don't want to be around them. In all honesty, you probably already are. Whether the stats 1 in 4 or 1 in 5.
Yes.
Everybody is around somebody, just so you know.
Anytime I tell a person that I have mental illness, they immediately say, I have a brother, I have a sister, I have a friend. It's very widespread. As many as 50% of the American public will have some kind of mental health issue during their life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been shown. Now, could you talk a little bit about other kind of works you do at Connecticut Legal Rights Project?
Absolutely. Connecticut Legal Rights Project was formed, actually, again, 1990 was when our date of incorporation was, but they came out of the result of a lawsuit against the state of Connecticut on behalf of people who were resident at the 3 big state hospitals at the time. And so, founded as a result of a consent decree, some of the money we get from the state of Connecticut is to protect the legal rights of people who are inpatient at state-operated facilities. We also get money to protect people's housing rights, whether that's getting access to housing or maintaining their housing if they're being evicted. Housing discrimination.
Is there much discrimination in that area?
And really what it is in terms of the discrimination for people with psychiatric disabilities getting into housing, you will sometimes hear those stories of, oh, I don't want one of them living in this building. You don't necessarily see as much outright blatant discrimination, but what you will see is that somebody gets turned down for housing because of problems that arose as a result of their disability, whether it might be bad credit because if you're manic and you run up your bills, or if you got caught up in the criminal justice system as a result of behaviors you were exhibiting because of your disability. We can ask for reasonable accommodations and get people into housing, get them to change their decision, and give people access. And then it's all the other stuff.
What do you say to, say landlords who are discriminatory? Do you ever meet with them to sort of allay their fears, allay their prejudice in any way? That's
really not the role of a lawyer. If we're lawyers representing clients, it's not our job to try to educate the other side. In terms of things that I've done in public life before I was at this particular job, I think every time we have conversations like this, it shows people who, whether they're landlords, whether they're employers, whether they're, people who run stores, it shows that we're here and we belong here. But it's not really my role in terms of being a lawyer, in terms of being the executive director of CLRP to educate those folks, but it's to represent our clients for what they want.
Do you have like a takeaway message for our viewers, Kathy? I mean, things that you might want to say to the public that you don't have a chance to say in your role as executive director of CLRP?
Sure. I mean, what I would say is that people living with mental health conditions are a part of our community. They have the right to be included in our community, and we need to respect those legal rights. I think as we see budget pressures come to bear, it will be a more challenging situation, but we here at CLRP are committed to doing everything we can to represent our clients.
Thank you. You're also on the Governor's Commission for Sandy Hook, aren't you?
I did serve on that.
And what sort of conclusions did they come to that you think helped the situation here in Connecticut?
Well, I think one of the important things that the governor did in appointing people to the Sandy Hook Advisory Commission was including people with lived experience on it. And that's why I was asked to be on it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on my program tonight.
You're very welcome.
I really enjoyed talking with you, and I think our viewers have also.
Thanks.
And I want to thank the viewers also for looking in. Thank you very much.
I guess we got more time.
Keep going.